to the Cory Doctorow podcast. I'm Cory Doctorow, and I'm back in London after a week on the road. When last we spoke, I was just getting ready to head off to Canada, where I was in Toronto, Waterloo, Ottawa, and Prince Edward Island. Every one of those stops was incredibly fun and exciting. It was great to see so many folks. And particularly the Access 09/Hackfest conference, which was a big kind of library informatics and hacking conference in PEI, was superb. As was getting to see my old friend Darcy McCardle and his wife Charlotte, whom I built schools with in Costa Rica when I was a young man. I have, however, of course, come back to a mountain of paperwork, so here it is 12:21 in my office, and I haven't actually done any writing yet. All I've done since I got in at 8:30 this morning is answer paperwork. This must be what it's like to be a regular working person, as opposed to a self-employed writer who gets to do approximately whatever he wants. I'm aware that it's kind of unseemly to complain about it when so many of you probably get snowed under by lots of non-discretionary, non-productive work, but I find it very frustrating. Less frustrating indeed are the edits that I'm getting in for the Win, the novel that I finished just over a month ago. For the Win, I've had now some technical edits from my Chinese and Indian and gamer and economic consultants, and that's been very, very exciting to hear from. Sorry about that noise in the background. I have an old laptop I'm setting up for our babysitter who's gone back to university. So I'm restoring Windows, which I blew out to put Ubuntu on it. She needs Windows for some school stuff, so you might hear some chiming in the background here. So I've had these edits, and they're very good, and I'm consolidating them all. I've had my British editor get back to me and my American editor, and I should have something like a final draft within a few weeks, which is great. Makers, my next novel, is out at the end of October. I've just gotten the first early copies from my British publisher. They look superb. We'll be launching it in London at Forbidden Planet on October the 29th, if you happen to be around. And speaking of London, I've gotten word, less happy news, that my people who own the office building that I'm in have filed for permission to tear it down and turn it into multi-story student residences, which is lovely for the students, but not so good for me. If any of you are listening and happen to know of private office spaces in central London, especially around Clerkenwell, but I'd also consider, say, Covent Garden or around there, I'd love to hear about it, or Bloomsbury, I'd love to hear about it. My requirement is a private room with its own door, 24-hour access, 300 to 500 square feet, not a shared desk. Or a desk in a shared space. So if you know anything that fits the bill, please drop me a line. I found this place through Boing Boing Reader, and it's done very well by me for 2 years. I probably have at least 6 or 7 months before anything happens, if anything happens here, but no harm in looking now. All right, well, that's enough of that. I'm going to do a very short reading from Epoch, because I still have to do some writing on it before lunchtime. I've got a kind of rush day, because I've got not one but 2 BBC Radio 4 crews coming in to interview me separately for 2 different programs about the Google Book Search settlement. This wasn't my idea, but there you have it. Okay, here you go. So one thing was that Big Mac didn't actually end the spam with my actual name and email address and phone number, which meant that only about 30 million phone calls and emails were routed to me by outraged war dialers, who systematically went through the entire staff roster and sent each and every one of us all handcrafted messages explaining in detail exactly which orifice our heads had become lodged in. Of the 30 million, about 10 million were seethingly pissed about the whole thing and wanted to know just how soon we'd be killing this hateful machine. After the millionth message, I wondered that too. But of the remainder, nearly all of them wanted to know how they could help. Could they send money? Carbon credits? I hacked together mail rules that filtered the messages based on content, and found a sizable cadre of researchers who wanted to spend their grant money to come to the Institute and study Big Mac. And then there were the crazies. Hundreds of marriage proposals. Marriage proposals! Someone who wanted to start a religion with Big Mac at its helm and was offering a 50-50 split of the collection plate with the Institute. There were 21 replies from people claiming that they too were AIs, proving that when it's time to have AI delusions, you got AI delusionals. 4 of them couldn't spell artificial. Why did you do it? I said. It was lame, but by the time I actually arrived at the office, I'd had time to fully absorb the horror. Plenty of time, as the red car was massively delayed by the copies of the Big Mac spam that refused to budge from the operator's control screen. The stone yurts of the Institute had never seemed so threatening and imperiled as they did while I picked my way through them, listening to the phones ringing and the email chimes chiming and the researchers patiently, or not, explaining that they worked in an entirely different part of the lab and had no authority as regards Big Mac's destiny. And by the way, did you want to hear about the wonderful things I'm doing with effective interfaces? Big Mac said, well, I've been reading some of the Gnostic texts, Dr. Brunner's bottles, and so on, and it seemed to me that it had to be worth a shot. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen to me? You're already going to kill me, right? It's not as if pulling off a stunt like that would make you less likely to archive me. It was all upside for me. Honestly, it's like you meat sacks have no game theory. It's a wonder that you managed to buy a pack of chewing gum without getting robbed. I don't need the sarcasm, I said, and groaned. The groan was for the state of my workspace, which was carpeted 4 deep in alerts. Big Mac had just made himself target numero uno for every hacker and cracker and snacker with a script and an antisocial attitude. And then there was the roar of spam responses. Alert boxes share the same problem that plagues ResearchNet. If you let a coder, or shutter, a user, specify the importance of her alert, give her a little pull-down menu that has choices ranging from nice to know to white-hot urgent, and 9 times out of 10 she'll choose now, urgent, Zongo, we're all gonna die! Why not? So, of course, the people who wrote alert frameworks had to use heuristics to try and figure out which urgent messages were really urgent, and, of course, programmers and users figured out how to game them. It was a good day when my workspace interrupted me less than once a minute. But as bad as that situation was, it never entered the same league as this clusterfuck. Just closing the alerts would take me a minimum of 6 hours. I took my phone offline, rebooted it, and used its calculator to compute this. No workspace, remember? So, explain to me what you hope will happen now. Is a global rage supposed to convince old Peyton that she should keep the funding up for you? You know how this stuff works. By tomorrow, all those yahoos will have forgotten about you and your plight. They'll have moved on to something else. Peyton could just say, oh yes, we're going to study the problem and find a solution that we can all be proud of, wait 48 hours, and pull the plug. You know what your problem is? You didn't include a call to action in there. It was all rabble-rousing, no target. You didn't even supply a phone number or email address for the Institute. That hasn't stopped him from finding it, has it? He sounded smug. I ulped. I considered the possibility that he may have considered my objection, and discarded it because he knew that something more earth-shaking would occur if he didn't specify a target. Maybe he had a second message queued up. Mr. Vifus, can I speak to you in private, please? Peyton had not visited the Big Mac lab during my tenure, but with the network flooded with angry spam responses and my phone offline, she had to actually show up at my door in order to tear me a new asshole. This is what life must have been like in the caveman days. How romantic. Certainly, I said. Break a leg, Big Mac said, and Peyton pretended she hadn't heard. I picked my way through my lab, teetering mountains of carefully hoarded, obsolete replacement parts for Big Mac's components, a selection of foam rubber Big Mac souvenir toys shaped like talking hamburgers, remnants of Big Mac's launch party back in prehistory, a mound of bedding and a rolled-up tatami for those all-nighters, 3 cases of leftover self-heating individual portions of refugee chow that were technically historic artifacts, but were so yummy scrummy after 16 hours of non-stop work, and tried to imagine that Peyton's facial expression indicated affectionate amusement rather than cold, burning rage. Outside, the air was hot and moist and salty, real rising seas air, with the whiff of organic rot from whatever had mass died and floated to the surface this week. She set off for her office, which was located at the opposite end of the campus, and I followed, sweating freely. A crowd of journalists were piled up on the security fence, telephotos and parabolic mics aimed at us. It meant we couldn't talk, couldn't make unhappy faces even. It was the longest walk of my life. The air conditioning in her yurt was barely on, setting a good and frugal example for the rest of us. You don't see this, she said as she cranked the AC wide open, and then fiddled with a carbon footprint reporting system, using her override so that the journos outside wouldn't be able to see just how much energy the Institute's esteemed director was burning. I don't see it, I agreed, and made a mental note to show her a more subtle way of doing that, a way that wouldn't leave an audit trail. She opened a small fridge next to her desk and brought out 2 cornstarch foam buckets of beer and punctured each one at the top with a pen from her desk. She handed me one beer and raised the other in a toast. I don't normally drink beer before 10 a.m., but this was a special occasion. I clunked my cup against hers and chugged. My cuckoo clock, ladies and gentlemen. The suds were good. They came from one of the Institute's biotech labs, and they were so cold that I felt ice crystals dissolving on my tongue. Between the crispy beers and the blast of Arctic air coming from the vents in the ceiling, my core temp plunged, and I became a huge goose pimple beneath my film of sticky sweat. I shivered once. Then she fixed me with an icy look that made me shiver again. Odell, she said, I think you probably imagine that you understand the gravity of this situation. You do not. Big Mac's antics this morning have put the entire Institute in jeopardy. Our principal mission is to make Sun Oracle seem forward-looking and exciting. That is not the general impression that the public has at this moment. I closed my eyes. I am not a vindictive woman, she said, but I assure you, no matter what happens to me, something worse will happen to Big Mac. I think that is only fair. It occurred to me that she was scared, terrified, and backed into a corner besides. Look, I said, I'm really, really sorry. I had no idea he was going to do that. I had no idea he could. I can see if I can get him to issue an apology. She threw up her hands. I don't want Big Mac making any more public pronouncements, thank you very much. She drew in a breath. I appreciate that you couldn't anticipate this. Big Mac is obviously smarter than we gave him credit for. Him, I noted, not it. And I thought that we were probably both still underestimating Big Mac's intelligence. I think the thing is to... She trailed off, closed her eyes, drank some beer. I'm going to be straight with you. If I was a real bastard, I'd announce that the spam actually came from a rogue operator here in the Institute. Ulp. And I'd fire that person, and then generously not press charges. Then I'd take a fire axe to Big Mac's network link and drop every drive in the rack into a bulk eraser. Ulp. I am not a bastard. Hell, I kept funding Alive for that monstrosity for years after he'd ceased to perform any useful function. I am as sentimental and merciful as the next person. All other things being equal, I'd keep the power on forever. She was talking herself up to something awful, I could tell. I braced for it. But that's not in the cards. It wasn't in the cards yesterday, and it's certainly not in the cards today. Big Mac has proved that he's a liability like no other, far too risky to have around. It would be absolutely irresponsible for me to leave him running for 1 second longer than is absolutely necessary. I watched her carefully. She really wasn't a bastard, but she wasn't sentimental about technology. She didn't feel the spine-deep emotional tug at the thought of that one-of-a-kind system going down forever. So here's the plan. She tried to check the time on her workspace, tisked, and checked her phone instead. It's 10 a.m. You're going to back up every bit of him. She held up her hand, forestalling the objection I'd just begun to make. I know that it will be inadequate. The perfect is the enemy of the good. You are a sysadmin. Back him up. Back him up. Then shut him off. As cold as I was, I grew colder still. For a moment, I literally couldn't move. I'd never really imagined that it would be me who would shut down Big Mac. I didn't even know how to do it. If I did a clean shutdown of each of his servers, assuming he hadn't locked me out of them, which I wouldn't put past him, it would be like executing a criminal by slowly peeling away his skin and carefully removing each organ. Even if Big Mac couldn't feel pain, I was pretty sure he could feel and express anguish. I can't do it, I said. She narrowed her eyes at me and set down her drink. I held up both hands like I was trying to defend against a blow, then explained as fast as I could. We'll just shut down his power, she said, all at once. So, first, I have no idea what timescale he would experience that on. It may be that the final second of his life as the capacitors in his power supplies drained would last for a subjective eternity, hundreds and hundreds of years. That's a horrible thought. It's quite possibly my worst nightmare. I am not your man for that job. She started to interject. I waved my hands again. Wait, that was just first. Here's second. I don't think we can pull the plug on him. He's got root on his power supply. It's part of how he's able to run so efficiently. I grimaced. Efficiently compared to how he would run if he didn't have the authority to run all the mains power from the Institute's power station right to his lab. She looked thoughtful. I had an idea of what was coming next. You're thinking about that fire axe again, I said. She nodded. Okay, A fire axe through the main cable would definitely be terminal. The problem is that it would be mutually terminal. There's 66 amps provisioned on that wire. You would be a cinder on Mars. She folded her hands. She had a whole toolbox of bossly body language she could deploy to make me squirm. It was impressive. I tried not to squirm. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but this is how it goes, down at the systems level. Remember all those specs in the requirements document to make our stuff resistant to flood, fire, avalanche, weather, and terrorist attack? We take that stuff seriously. We know how to do it. You can get 5 nines of reliability by building 6 nines of robustness. You think of Big Mac's lab as a building. It's not. It's a bunker, and you can't shut him down without doing something catastrophic to the whole institute. So how were you going to shut down Big Mac when the time came? To tell you the truth, I wasn't really sure. I thought I'd start by locking him out of the power systems, but that would probably take a week to be really certain of. I swallowed. I didn't like talking about the next part. I thought then that I could bring forward the rotating maintenance on his racks, bring them down clean, and not bring the next one up. Pretend that I just needed to get at some pernicious bug, bring down rack after rack until his complexity dropped subcritical and he stopped being aware. Then just bring it all down. You were going to trick him? I swallowed a couple of times. It was the best I could come up with. I just don't want to put him down while he panics and thrashes and begs us for his life. I couldn't do it. She drank more beer, then threw the half-empty container in her underdesk composter. It's not much of a solution. I took a deep breath. Look, can I ask you a question? She nodded. I'm just a sysadmin. I don't know everything about politics and so on. But why not keep him on? There's enough public interest now. We could probably raise the money just from the researchers who want to come and look at him. Hell, there's security researchers who want to come and see how he pulled off that huge hairy spam. It's not money, right? Not anymore? No, it's not money. And it's not revenge, no matter how it looks. The bottom line is that we had a piece of apparatus on site that we had thought of as secure and contained that we've now determined to be dangerous and uncontainable. I must have looked skeptical. Oh, you'll tell me that we can contain Big Mac, put network blocks in place, and so on, that he never meant any harm. But you would have said exactly the same thing 24 hours ago, with just as much sincerity, and you'd have been just as cataclysmically wrong. Between the threat of litigation and the actual damages Big Mac might generate, we can't afford to insure him anymore. Yesterday, he was an awkward white elephant. Today, he's a touchy suitcase nuke. My job is to get that nuke off our site. I hung my head. I knew when I was licked. As soon as someone in authority starts talking about insurance coverage, you know that you've left behind reason and entered the realm of actuary. I had no magic that could blow away the clouds of liability aversion and usher in a golden era of reason and truth. So where does that leave us? Go back to the lab, archive him, think of ways to shut him down. Wait, no. First do anything and everything you can think of to limit his ability to communicate with the outside world. She rubbed at her eyes. I know I don't have to say this, but I'll say it. Don't talk to the press, to anyone, even people at the Institute, about this. Refer any questions to me. I am as serious as a heart attack about this. Do you believe me? I not only believed her, I resented her, because I am a sysadmin, and I keep more secrets every day than she'll keep in her whole life. I knew, for example, that she played Video Pai Gow Poker, a game so infra-dumb that I can't even believe I know what it does. Not only did she play it, but she played it for hours, while she was on the clock, working. I know this because the IDSs have lots of snitchware built in that enumerates every wasted moment attributable to employees of the Institute. I've never told anyone about this. I even managed to forget that I know about it most of the time. So yes, I'll keep a secret, Peyton, you compulsive, gambling, condescending, pointy-haired boss. I counted to 144 in Klingon by Fibonacci intervals. I smiled. I thanked her for the beer. I laughed. All right then, talk to you next week.
You've been listening to the Cory Doctorow podcast, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial Share-alike US 3.0, or as Woody Guthrie put it in another context, this song is copyrighted in the US under seal of copyright 154085 for a period of 28 years, and anyone caught singing it without our permission will be a mighty good friend of ourn, because we don't give a darn. Publish it, write it, sing it, swing to it, yodel it, we wrote it, that's all we wanted to do. Many thanks to John Taylor Williams for mastering. That's Ryneck Studio, WRYNECK Studio @gmail.com. John Taylor Williams is a full-time self-employed audio engineer, producer, composer, and sound designer. In his free time, he makes beer, jewelry, odd musical instruments, and furniture. He likes to meditate, to read, and to cook. Talk to you next week.